Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it takes a special kind of film fan to know that when the action gets onto the Helltrack, things are just going to a completely different level. And if you're within the sound of my voice, guess what? That must mean you are in the seats with, once more, as always, my name is Dave Voigt. I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And, you know, if you like how we do things, I'm assuming you do because you're listening right now. I mean, it's just this kind of how we roll. You can subscribe to the podcast. We'd love it if you did that. And I mean, you can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. Plus, if you wouldn't mind, could you check us out on social media too? We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, and we're on Instagram at either at In the Seats, and it's at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, the moving image at large, because God bless it, we love to do it, and we love it when you come and read about it too. So please stop on by. On this episode, boys and girls, but this is something I get excited for, because we're celebrating the 35th anniversary of a piece of cinema that is near and dear to my heart. The film is called RAD, and if you didn't know, it's a movie from the 80s, and it is basically sort of the coming-of-age BMX sort of opus about young Cru Jones, who just happens to be the best BMX biker in his town. And he's got all the talent to become the best BMX daredevil in the world, but he's just the local paperboy. Meanwhile, Bart Taylor, who's the best BMX biker in the world, is in town to race at the $100,000 Helltrack competition, the most grueling race in BMX history. Cru wants a shot, but his mom really wants him to take college entrance exams too, which are just happen to be on the same day. And for the first time in his life, Cru has to make his own decisions. He decides to go for Helltrack, but the race promoter's got a plan of his own to keep the local whiz kid off the track and away from his prize champion. It's a piece of 80s cinema that is filled with basically filled with joy, and it's from director Hal Needham, who has had who just put this together on a wing and a prayer, and it's gone through rights issues and disappeared and come back and forth, but it's one of those films that never really went away. And thanks to our friends over at Utopia and Circle Collective, they have been getting this back up into the ethos, and it's been re-released on Blu-ray, and there's been a new remastering from a 4K scan from the original negatives, and it's been playing a theatrical run down in the States in the wake of its 35th anniversary. And in a single one-night event in the States, it actually made $400,000, and it had the second per screen average behind James Bond, which was amazing. And it is coming to Cineplex for a single night. Well, technically, but it's playing on this coming November 18th, Thursday, at your local Cineplex. Please check locations for listings. But there's going to be encore screenings as well on the 19th, and on the 21st. And oh my God, if you're a child of the 80s like I am, get yourself a ticket to RAD, because you are not going to regret it. But in advance of that, we had the distinct pleasure of sitting down and talking with the one and only Bart Taylor, a.k.a. Bart Connor, about this film and just sort of its legacy and how a career in gymnastics took him to this, and how RAD has stayed a part of his professional legacy. And even though we had some technical difficulties on this talk, it's a fantastic one, which I just enjoyed the hell out of. But there is a link in the description below to please go check out your local Cineplex to check out RAD on the big screen with the rest of us. I will be there definitely. But enjoy our talk with Bart, because it's a real fun one. But check that out, and check out RAD on screens at Cineplex near you this week. I'll be honest, I didn't even discover the movie when it came out. I only discovered this film a few years ago. Okay. But I've got to ask, how does one go from gymnastics to being in a movie? It's not a straight line. Like, I'm dying to hear that story.
Well, I tell you, it is fairly interesting for many reasons. For one, obviously, if you're making a BMX movie, you get the top BMX riders in the world. And then you go to Hollywood and you get the top actors who will be willing to play in this movie. And then all of a sudden there's this gymnastics guy. Like, why is he here? And it's kind of an interesting story. I was in the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, and I had a fairly high profile at that time. And when they were casting this movie, the director, Hal Needham, who's an icon and a legend of sorts, he said he wanted me. Had seen me on TV somewhere or whatever. And I think in a way, probably he saw me as this sort of blonde guy. I was probably the stereotypical guy, like the bad guy in Karate Kid. What's his name? William?
Oh, that's it. Yeah. William Zabka. Yeah.
Zabka. So I don't know exactly why, but I have an agent at the time in New York, and they called me and he said, this Hal Needham, who's done, Cannonball Run and all those wacky movies. They said, he wants you in this movie, and they're going to send you some script and see what you think about it. So I read it and I thought, well, that's great. And I get a call. He says, I'd like to meet with you. So he's quite a NASCAR fan, and he was really into racing at the time. And so he's coming back from a NASCAR race, and he said, I'll stop in Oklahoma on my way back to Los Angeles from this NASCAR race, because I live in Oklahoma. And he said, we'll just meet and talk a little bit about what I'm doing in the movie. And so I picked him up at the airport, and I'm a bit of a car guy myself. I have some old classic cars and some sports cars. And so I picked him up in a turbo Porsche. And we talked cars for about 2 hours. And I said, do you want to, get a cup of coffee and maybe run some of these lines? And he goes, no, you're already in my movie. So that was it. I didn't even have to audition. I took him back to the airport, and it was such he's kind of a Hollywood institution at the time. But it is funny, because when I got on the set, I realized there was these distinct groups. There was the actors who hung out with the actors, and there were the BMX people who hung out with the BMX people. And I was neither. So I kind of like floated and, just sort of joined whatever group I could hang out with. But I was thrilled to have the opportunity, for sure.
Now, I mean, had you ever ridden a BMX bike in your life before this?
Well, yeah. No, certainly not at that level.
At this level,
and, and ironically, they had all the best pro riders in the world, so I couldn't possibly keep up with them. But another interesting story is 3 weeks before we made the movie, I was doing a gymnastics exhibition, and I landed badly on a dismount, and I completely dislocated and destroyed my knee. Complete reconstruction. I had a 5-hour surgery, and I called him and I said, I'm in the hospital. I blew my knee out. I'm afraid I can't do your movie. And he, being an old Hollywood stuntman, says, oh, we'll give you some Percodan. You'll be fine. And so literally I said, well, I don't think I can do it because my leg isn't immobilized. Literally, I was going to have my leg bent for the next 10 weeks. And he goes, we'll shoot around that. So I show up in Calgary, where we made the movie. And I remember the first day I walked on the set, people are like, whoa, what happened? And I said, didn't Hal tell you? I called him 3 ago. I'm going to come on crutches. And he goes, no, he never mentioned a thing. So, Hal, like I said, being an old Hollywood stuntman, he figured, well, we're going to stunt you anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So it is kind of funny when you know that story, and then you look at the movie and you realize most of the movie I'm shot from the waist up. You don't see a lot of waist down, is because literally I had to walk like this to keep from looking like I was limping.
Now, I mean, coming off of 84, was Hollywood or TV like something that was even remotely in your mind? Because I mean, obviously you had a high profile, you were doing some stuff, but
Yeah.
once you had sort of hung up, at least the amateur end of the gymnastic side, was going into that sort of even sort of in your thought process at that stage?
Well, I was working as a commentator for ESPN and I had done some television work. So I was comfortable being on camera, but no, I don't think so. But then, of course, you win a gold medal in Hollywood and you meet all these celebrities and movie stars and stuff. And all of a sudden, I have to admit, we all probably thought, wow, this would be cool if this, segued into a career as a movie star. But so, yeah, it was easy to say yes. I'm like, are you kidding, to be in a movie? But the funny thing about it was, RAD lasted about like 2 minutes at the theater before it, got pulled, and we got shellacked, and the critics didn't like it, and it went straight to video. But I understand there was a few years there where it was one of the top rented VHSs in the country from Blockbuster. For some reason, a lot of young boys in that sort of 10 to 15 year age group, they just connected with this movie. I mean, a week doesn't go by where I don't meet somebody who is maybe 45 years old now. He said, oh my God, I rented that movie 100 times. We wore it out. And they knew all the lines. And I guess for a kid at that age, that was just a pretty cool movie, even though for an adult, it looked fairly campy. For a young boy who was playing on his bike and trying to do cool tricks, it was awesome.
When did you start to notice that? Because I mean, I am curious about that, because I mean, obviously, like you said, coming off of 84, you had high profile, you were still doing commentary for a good run there. Like, when after RAD did you did the sort of the mentions start to pop up of like, hey man, I rented your movie, man, that was fun?
So I mean, literally, I bet it was at least 20 years.
Wow.
I'm not kidding you. And all of a sudden I meet these grown men, and I met a guy, he's got one kid named Cru and one kid named Bart. I'm like, are you serious? He goes, man, I love that movie. I love the music. It was so awesome. When I was growing up, that's all I wanted to be, was a BMX rider. So, Hal Needham was brilliant in that he knew what would appeal to these kids. And, Helltrack was legendary. I mean, it was so scary. I mean, it looked extreme. And all those kids are even now, extreme sports. It looks outrageous and fun and dangerous, and it appeals to them. So he knew how to tap into, but literally it was easily 20 years later. And all of a sudden, oh my God, I had no idea there was such a groundswell of support at the grassroots. I mean, the critics didn't like it. It didn't last in the theaters, but kids loved it. And in the end of the day, that's what makes a movie work. The fan.
For sure. No, absolutely. Now I'm curious, had there not been the injury, was there any talk of you doing any of the actual riding or any of the stunts yourself?
No, because, obviously the racing scenes and stuff were really deemed only for professionals. I mean, yeah, I could get around on a bike if they needed me to tool around in the park and talk to somebody, but no, not at that level. And when I got up there and I saw what these guys were doing, I mean, these guys were, Pat Romano, and let's see who else stunted me, a guy named Martin Aparijo. I mean, these were like the icon sport. The track looked outrageous. It couldn't just be an average track. It had to look like scary dangerous.
Oh, for sure.
After they built the track. And yeah, so I mean, all the really difficult stunts were done by the best riders in the world. And even they were terrified when they saw Helltrack, because that drop-in ramp was like, it had to be 25 feet, looked like it was straight down. Of course it wasn't, but all the pro riders got up there and would go, we're not doing it. That's terrifying. We're not going. We're going to spank right when we hit the bottom of that ramp on the transition. And so one kid laid a ladder up against that ramp, and he put the ladder up there and he carried his bike up about 3 steps and jumped on his bike and rode down. And then he went up about 5 steps on the ladder and did it again. And finally, he got up about 7, 8 steps on the ladder and dropped in and realized that it's scary, but it's makeable. And then finally, one of the pro riders, after watching this teenager cut this stuff, he goes, I'm just going down. I don't know who it was. Maybe it was Hollywood Mike Miranda, one of those guys. And then, of course, once one guy went, every guy had to go. So, yeah, it was, I mean, that was part of the appeal, is that the racing was real and the track was outrageous. I mean, you see a lot of crashes in that movie. They're legit. I mean, that they didn't stage those things. I mean, people spanking right on their face. It was hard.
Yeah. No, I mean,
does seeing sort of action like that sort of get your competitive juices flowing to sort of get back and try to sort of maybe go for 88? Or were you sort of at that stage content to be like, you know what, I'm done, let you guys do it?
Yeah, David, I was done because, I was in the 76 Olympics when I was 18. And then I made the 1980 team, because that was the year we boycotted the Olympics in Moscow. So by the time the 84 games came along, I was, 26 years old, and I'd already been through several injuries and things. So I was at the end of my line. So I wasn't tempted to come back, but it still blows my mind to this day that the movie still resonates with the fans. And to me, that is extremely gratifying.
Is there anything from the gymnastics world that maybe you were surprised you were able to apply to the Hollywood world?
Well, they work hard. I mean, it's tough work, and it doesn't sound like it's tough work, but it's a grind, and you got to like the grind. And that's the part of, sports and anything you want to be excellent at is you got to embrace the grind. And they worked hard. Every morning it was early, and every night it was late. And but they got all the shooting done in, I think, less than 40 days up there in Cochrane. And it was great fun.
Now, I've got to ask, because for better or for worse, RAD is part of your professional legacy. And I'm kind of curious because, obviously you've done so much sort of in gymnastics and with your wife and everything else, but like, how does it feel to have this sort of little corner of Hollywood sort of in your sort of personal resume that every once in a while someone will go, hey, you were in RAD?
It's funny. I made it Helltrack, and it was almost identical to what we had in Cochrane in Canada. And literally, I'll bet you 1,500 people came from something like 15 or 18 countries. People from New Zealand and Australia and England and Belgium, they came with their bikes to ride Helltrack at this little place in Texas. And the people lined up, and Bill Allen and I signed autographs for hours and hours. We just couldn't believe the interest in it. And I remember one of the guys came up to me and he goes, hey man, this is so rad to meet you. He goes, my wife tells me you used to be a gymnast. So I loved it because, that's all they knew me for. And that was just fine, So it is awesome. And I have to say, at the same time, one of my Olympic teammates, Mitch Gaylord, who spent some time in Hollywood and studied there, he made a movie called American Anthem about gymnastics.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
With Janet Jones. And that movie had a much bigger budget and a much bigger release. And, it was made by the people that did Purple Rain. So they were expecting like this huge success. Well, it didn't succeed terribly well, but it was a much bigger release than our little movie. But, I kept thinking, well, I'm in kind of the second-rate movie of the gymnastic stars coming out of the Olympics. So I get a little bit of pleasure actually knowing that all these years later, I don't hear anybody talking about American Anthem, but I mean, lots of people that still connected with RAD. In fact, I was in an appearance many years ago in LA, a fundraiser, and I'm standing on this stage. You get a picture of this. I'm standing between Shaquille O'Neal and Magic Johnson, which is
oh wow,
it's a pretty funny looking picture if you can imagine that anyway. And as I'm standing next to Shaquille, he leans down and goes, hey man, I love you in that movie RAD. So I was loving it. So could you imagine Shaquille on a BMX bike?
Oh man, that'd be a sight to see. Kazam too. Can't wait.
I know.
But you know what, man? Thanks. Thank you for the time today. And just thanks for sort of being a part of something that so many people have this real intense love for. And really at the end of the day, that's the important thing with a movie like RAD. We've got sellout screenings here in Toronto, and people yeah. And it's one of those things where people have such fond memories of the movie and they want to re-experience it and they want to get lost in that world again, which again, at the end of the day, when you're doing a movie, that's kind of the point of making the movie in the first place.
And the thing I loved about it, because, they did a few weeks ago, they released it nationally here. I think it was in 550 theaters around the country. I went to my local theater and there was 165 available seats and there was 163 people there. It was almost completely packed. And it's the first movie I've been to since COVID, right? And I signed autographs for an hour afterward. And I couldn't believe how many people who were, young men between, say, 35 and 45, who brought their kids to see this movie. And they wanted their kids to see it. So to me, that was extremely gratifying.
it stands the test of time, man. And you know what? Thank you for the work and thank you for the time today, man. This was fun. I'm glad we got to talk about this little slice of pop culture history that maybe you don't get to talk about nearly as much when you're doing interviews. You're probably doing more gymnastic based stuff, but
usually I am. But David, I thank you for your time today as well.
All right. Thanks, Bart.
Bye.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.